Okay, so I'm going to talk about progress towards CMIP7. I'm on the CMIP panel. I've been on there since January 2020. Not much happened for a while, but now we're really ramping up and wanting lots of feedback and engagement from the scientific community and policymakers. So I thought I'd just start by a bit of a motivation slide. Why do we do CMIP? It's been around since the 90s and it's had lots of evolution, as most people know. But here's just a few perspectives. There is no best model for climate change. We can't test our models against the future. And there's this diversity of equally plausible approaches to modelling the climate system. So this multi-model context is critical for understanding our risk for future climate change. It enables fundamental research through coordination of output, and CMIP's been very good, particularly in the CMIP6 phase of creating this data infrastructure that means anyone around the world can now really analyse climate models, which previously had been more difficult. CMIP can highlight systematic biases in our models, can help set model development priorities. It does allow the models to be scrutinised by the whole climate research community, and critically it does provide input into these policy decisions. And for an individual model, say for Australia, the participation provides a focus on issues unique to our region. And so here I've just got the Australian monsoon projections from a paper led by ACCESS-NRI, and you can just see the big span of projections for the Australian monsoon, and this, you know, our region is unique, our land surface is unique, we sit between the tropics and Antarctica, so this allows us to really experiment with our model in a way that other countries may not do. Okay, so where were we? CMIP6 was the biggest one yet. It was framed around these science questions, both in terms of understanding the Earth system, but also how is the future climate going to change. We do have a new website, which doesn't come up when you Google it, but if you just note it there, wcip-cmip.org, it's still getting developed, but there's information there that you can look at. So there were these endorsed model intercomparison projects, so MIPs, in CMIP6, 23 of them. They included, a lot of them were about using coupled climate models to understand the science, but there are also more diagnostic MIPs. So Cordex, for example, is the downscaling experiments requested information from the CMIP models so that they could then use that in their regional models. Okay, so what have we been doing since CMIP6? So the big thing that happened in 2021 was a community survey, really asking what were the priorities for the next phase of CMIP. So there was a clear message that we don't want any big changes in terms of the structure from CMIP6. Retain alignment to IPCC in some form, but there was this understanding that the timing of the IPCC does create this real bottleneck and burden on modelling centres. So perhaps prioritisation of some of the core experiments, say scenario MIP, could be done, and disconnect the other MIPs somewhat from that timeline. A need for greater focus on impacts and adaptation, relevant experiments, also including updated scenarios to investigate new things like net zero and other kind of climate mitigation options that have kind of come along since the Paris Agreement. There was this real clear need that some of the elements that go into CMIP that are crucial for CMIP, like the forcings, so the greenhouse gases, the aerosols, the ozone, that are just done by volunteer scientists, voluntary efforts, need to become more operational. We need to have some way of creating them in a more rigorous and realistic kind of time frame. Okay, so that's the main thing, but yeah, also nurture the CMIP community and encourage new people and Global South scientists to engage. There's also the questions of how much can we already reuse from CMIP6? Do we really need to do all of the same simulations again? How many ensemble members do we need? Do we need to go, you know, how many high resolution simulations do we need? Do we need to do everything? And can we do this in a more environmental way can reduce our CO2 emissions, for instance. Okay, so this is a draft timeline that's up for discussion. As Helen said, we don't actually know what the timeline is for the IPCC report. My understanding is that they're meeting in June and they'll elect new co-chairs for the working groups in June this year. So until then, we don't even know if there's going to be an AR7. But we do know that there's the global stock take in 2028 when governments around the world will have to come together and sort of look at their nationally determined contributions, and information for that will be, if we could have some time critical information then, would be probably one of the key deadlines. So we've got these fuzzy boxes in the grey and the pink there, trying to guess at some of the timelines. So as everyone knows, you can't just kind of spin up your model and push go. It does take a lot of effort prior to running the model to get the CMIP infrastructure in place. The modelling centres need to know what the data request is, and that can take some iteration with the MIP people and the modelling centres. And then there's also the forcing dataset generation and testing. So one difficulty in CMIP6 was that some of the forcings weren't quite right, and then all these models ran them and realised after the fact that they needed to redo them because the forcing was incorrect. So if we can do some of that now, that would be useful. Okay, so what's been happening in the last year or so? There's now an international project office. So that was formed in March 2022. And that's really been a game changer. Eleanor O'Rourke is leading that. It's based at the European Space Agency. So there's 3 or 4 people there that are full-time working on CMIP and supporting the scientists. We've been doing this survey analysis, and out of that survey has been the development of task teams. And we've got lots, I'll talk about those next, but there's been a call for membership of that many of you have seen, and we've got lots of Australians that have joined up on that, which is great. We are currently discussing the CMIP panel membership and the terms of reference for that, and so that's going to evolve. And the goal is to have the experimental design for CMIP7 in place by the end of this year. So there's been a lot of drop-in kind of discussions over the last few months to try and help move those discussions forward. So here is the CMIP panel and the task team. So we have a new co-chair, Helene Hewitt, who's at the Met Office. And then the task team leaders are listed there. So Chloe McKellar, who's from CSIRO, is co-leading the data request. And we'll hear from the task team members later today. And so these task team members are also meeting regularly and are part of the CMIP panel to drive forward CMIP7. Okay, so just back to what the priorities were, I'd say what we've been working on are these main ones, trying to work on how we can create less burden on the modelling centres by potentially disconnecting some of the MIPs from this IPCC timeline. And the forcing one has been quite active in trying to determine how we sort of take the forcing forward, including the science of creating those, but also how we might lead into that global stock take and have kind of regular updates of the forcings that models can run. And so they have a survey out at the moment that just got extended, so I'd encourage you to fill that out if you're interested. So we've been talking about this, the structure here was the CMIP6 structure, and so it had these common experiments called the DEC that were the entry card for CMIP. If you want to participate in CMIP, you have to run these 4 experiments. And the goal of these is that they'll continue through each phase of CMIP, and these are really about characterising the model's climate and being able to understand how that model works. And so these are all idealized experiments for the most part, and so can continue from one phase to the next. And then in CMIP6, we also had the historical simulation, which is really the simulation that most people use for evaluation of the model. And then the other MIPs around that. So the problem with CMIP6, which was very successful in terms of the science, but really kind of got out of hand in terms of the number of MIPs and the number of experiments that people could run. And so there was this feeling that that we want to try and disconnect that and not have this kind of top-down endorsement by the CMIP panel, but have more of a community approach to most of those MIPs. Okay, so what is being proposed at the moment, and this is a draft again and very open to feedback, is that we have some core MIPs. And so we'll have the deck, and at the moment, most of the discussion is about keeping the deck the same as CMIP6, but there's still some potential for that to change, and potentially have these core experiments that will be timed for the IPCC deadline. So historical and scenario MIP are fairly key ones, but there could be others. And then have these other MIPs, more community MIPs that can happen at a different timeline. The discussion that we've had so far is that, you know, if you look at an IPCC report, it used almost every MIP that was run, right? A lot of those MIPs are these underpinning science that will help us understand future climate change. So this is an ongoing discussion. So yeah, I just wanted to finish with this idea that we want to support this continuous activity for model intercomparison. There's been a lot of great work in terms of the infrastructure, the data, and how we can use the output and facilitate access to the output. So we want to keep leveraging that. Want to try and support some ongoing MIP activities, be able to be responsive. So COVID MIP was a MIP that was run very much last minute after CMIP6 kind of had been already designed, but that was able to get done in a timely manner to feed into IPCC. Okay, I'll finish there. Thanks.